All right, we are ready to start doing some work on our images here in Lightroom. I'm going to walk through how I would edit these 3 different images here. And I want to start just show you a couple of things you can do to make editing in Lightroom a little bit easier. I like to have as much of my image visible as possible. So I don't really need this bar up here anymore. So I'm just going to click on that little up arrow right there. Just gives me a little more real estate to work with. And I'm not going to use these down here for a while. So I'm going to click on that little down arrow right there. Gives me a little more space to work with, and I don't want this one either. Because really this tab over here is the only one I need. So let's go ahead and go through how I would work on these images and some things you can do to make working on the images a little bit easier. First one is the zooming. You can see if I click on the image, it zooms in. You don't really have any easy control over how much it zooms in. Only you kind of do. It's right over here on this left-hand side, and you have 2 different zoom defaults. The first one is fit, and the second one is whatever you set here. So you have a lot of different options. When I click on this, that takes me to a 1-to-1 zoom. If you feel like that's too much, like you don't want to be quite zoomed in quite so much, you can do like a 1-to-4. And now you can see if I click again, it goes back to fit, and it will go back and forth between 1-to-4 and fit. Maybe that's not quite enough, so maybe I'll try 1-to-2. And now when I click, it goes back and forth between the 2. So whatever the last one I set is, whatever I set fit between fit and these here, that's what it will bounce back and forth. You can't even do like 8-to-1, which is way too close. That's a little too extreme in my opinion. 1-to-1 and 1-to-2 is about right. It's where I spend most of my time. So I'm gonna go back to 1-to-1 and then just go back and forth between fit and 1-to-1 is how I zoom in and zoom out. Also down here, this is my before and after options. I'm just gonna go ahead and click on this, and you can see I've got a before and an after over here. There's a lot of different ways you can do before and after. In fact, there are 4 of them. If you click on this little down arrow, you can see I can have the images side by side like this, or I can do a split, which is where it'll split the image in half, and changes I make will only happen to one side of it. I prefer to do just the normal before and after, and you can just click on this to cycle through the different ones there, but this is how I like to do it. If you want to get rid of the before and after, you just click back on this little dude right here, the loop view. Keyboard shortcut for that is D. It gets rid of before and after. I'm going to leave it on. I'm going to leave it just set, just like this here. And let's go through and look at what kind of things we would change on any given image. Okay, let's look over here on the right-hand side, under our Develop tab. This is our main adjustments that we're gonna make are right here in this window. I'm gonna start out as always just by doing the exposure. I just want to move that to the right a little bit. I just want to brighten this image up just a little bit. You see, to the right makes it brighter, to the left makes it darker. This is very similar to moving the Levels tab to moving the middle slider in the Levels option in Photoshop. And I'm just gonna brighten that image up just a little bit. And then I also want to change the whites and the blacks here, but I want to be careful in how much I do this because I don't want to make my whites too white or my blacks too dark. And that's called clipping, which is where we start to lose detail in the image. So we're going to turn on our clipping warnings by clicking on this little box right here and this little box right here. And you can see as soon as I did that, part of my image turned red. And that's Lightroom's way of warning me and saying, hey, this part of your image is getting really bright. Well, in this instance, I don't really mind that that went too bright. That's the sun reflecting off a metal pole. That's supposed to be bright. So I'm okay with that. So now I'm going to start moving my white slider to the right a little bit. And you can see I'm starting to get more and more red in the image. And now a lot of the image is red. I've clearly gone too far. You can see if I turn this off, my image is way too bright. So I'm going to bring this back a little bit. And I want to start just see a little bit of red on the whites that are important to me. Like I said, this I don't really care about this part right here as much, but here I want to see just a little bit of red, and maybe even that's a little too much. I'll come back just a little bit. Actually, I like that right there. That way none of my white in my flag has gotten too bright, but I've increased the contrast a little bit by bringing up the whites a little bit. Let's bring the black slider to the left, and look, I'm starting to get blue down in here. And that means that part of my image, these blue parts of my image are getting too dark. And I don't really care if this part gets too dark. That's the shadow in the tree. That doesn't really bother me too much. However, if parts of the flag start to turn blue, then we got a problem. So right there, you can see I'm getting a little bit of blue there that I don't want. So I'm going to back that off a little bit. And that's a pretty good place to stop right there. And that's a real easy way to kind of get a feel for where you should put your white and black sliders, is by turning those clipping masks on. And those aren't permanent. That red and blue aren't permanently there. They're just there as a warning to kind of let me know. I can turn those off at any time and see what my image is going to look like. And you can see right away my image has a little bit brighter. It has a little bit more contrast, a little more pop to it. I really like the way the after is looking so far in this. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to do the vibrant slider. I don't really do saturation in Lightroom. I don't really care for it. I don't know why. It doesn't look as good to me as Photoshop saturation. So I do vibrance, which is saturates, but not quite as much as saturation does. But I do it the same way I do my saturation in Photoshop. It's in that I take it all the way up to plus 100. And then without looking at the number, I only look at the image out here. I'm going to start slowly bringing this back towards 0, and I'm going to stop when I think I'm back at 0. And to me, that looks pretty good right there. So let's take a look at our before and after. You see our image has gone from kind of flat, not very colorful, to really having some good contrast and some good color in it. And I'm really happy with that. The last thing that I will play around with usually on every image is clarity. I like to add just a little bit. I'll show you what adding too much looks like. You can see that gives my image kind of a little bit of an edgy look. It kind of makes things look a little bit grittier. So plus 100 is probably a little too much. And minus 100 is definitely too much. Makes me feel like I'm in a dream or something. So I'm going to come in here, and I usually just do a little bit of clarity, not too much, somewhere between 10 and 20, just to give my image just a little bit more edge, a little bit more punch to it. All right, I want to show you what a couple other things do here on this slider. We don't use them always, but sometimes they come in real handy. The highlight slider, this will adjust things that aren't really bright, but aren't in the middle either. So highlights will increase the brightness or darkness of things that are kind of bright, but not too bright. So I actually want to darken that blue sky a little bit. I'm going to bring those highlights down just a little bit. I really like that. And shadows is kind of the opposite. It does things that are dark, but not too dark. You can adjust those. So I'm going to play around with that, and I can see I can bring that sky down even a little bit more by playing with the shadows. So you can play with those two sliders and see what happens. The contrast slider, I don't really mess with this one too much. To me, I feel like if I've done my work down here right, then I don't need it. And then white balance, we're going to get into this a little bit later on in the year. This should quickly show you that if your image is a little too blue or too yellow, you can fix that by moving this slider to the left or to the right. I actually like adding just a little bit of yellow to that image. I feel like it looks good. And then also if you have some green or magenta in your image, you can fix that by moving that to the left or right. And I kind of like the way that looks right about there. Just a little bit of green to the image. Looks good. And that's it, guys. Those are the basic settings we're going to make on every image. There are a lot of other changes we can make down here. We'll go through some of those later on. But for now, these are just some of the basic edits that you need to be making to every image you work on in Lightroom.